Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and a good morning at you. I think I'm going to have a sort of gravelly voice today. I hope it's not too horrific. My head is in so many places at the same time today that I think it's going to be one of those shows where we're jumping all over the place. There's just so much going on, so many things I'd like to get my 2 cents worth in, and love to hear yours as well. So feel free to jump on in. I guess the jury's back at it. What do you think? I so want a verdict today or tomorrow. It occurs to me that even though there's all these counts, if they find him guilty on one of, screwing up, falsifying one of the business records, then that makes all of them go away. So it's just a matter of them, agreeing. Agreeing, please, that in fact the prosecution put together a really airtight case, and where it just seems to me to be a pretty easy case. But then what do I know? So there's that. I wait with bated breath. I also have to tell you that the news of Major League Baseball and incorporating the players and their statistics into the record books is just a story that is blowing me away. And I've been reading about some of these players that have now been elevated to the greats, who we've never even, most of us have never even heard of. And I'm so grateful for this. And I was looking at a photo of Josh Gibson's grave in Allegheny Cemetery. It's just a flat little stone in the ground, and I was thinking he deserves better. I was also thinking that there's something wonderful about him toppling Ty Cobb, because my understanding of Ty Cobb is that he was an awful human being, and I mean a real racist. However, I mean, I'm sure most that could be said of an awful lot of folks back then. But Tyrus Raymond Cobb, Ty Cobb, who has for years enjoyed the distinction of being the best hitter in Major League Baseball. Well, he wasn't. Josh Gibson was. So I don't know, there's so many. I'm looking at a picture of Josh Gibson now, and he looks like a small guy, but I suppose people generally were smaller. I don't know. I don't know what his height was. He just looks small. Doesn't look particularly powerful, and yet he was the greatest. Incredible. Anyway, I'm loving it. I'm also assuming that the racists in America are just going insane about this, and that gives me some pleasure as well. Sam Alito. Sam Alito. Whoa. So we've heard from him. and he's doubled down. He's blaming his wife, not just for the one flag, but for both flags. And most astonishingly, he is saying that he has no power to have done anything. I love that he wrote all this down. Here's the quotes. I had nothing whatsoever. No, here we go. I had nothing whatsoever to do with the flying of the flag. I was not even aware of the upside down flag until it was called to my attention. As soon as I saw it, I asked my wife to take it down, but for several days she refused. There are so many reasons to laugh about that. I don't even know where to start. First of all, if you had a flag flying from your home, flags in homes are not in the backyard, they're in the front yard, right? And so we have to believe that he drove in and out of his home. I don't know how many times in the course of the flag having been flown, and never noticed something as strange as the flag was upside down. I mean, that's the kind of thing that just sort of, whether you're scanning uh, the skies for flags, it would just, you would see that. The idea that he hadn't been aware of it, so he's deaf, dumb, and blind. Well, yeah. And the powerlessness of this man. I asked my wife to take it down. She refused. Then he goes on to explain that he had no power over her at all. He says, my wife and I own our Virginia home jointly. She, therefore, has the legal right to use the property as she sees fit. And there were no additional steps that I could have taken to have the flag taken down. Um, I think it's Ruth Marcus in the Washington Post who has a column today on this and says, "What a weird marriage." I mean, that I don't even want to. I this poor powerless man married to this tough broad. Um, And I'm also thinking that he wrote this and he has to know it ain't going to play well among the Christian nationalist patriarchal types that he hangs with. I mean, who wears the pants, Sam? And then there's this. And this made my head explode. Alito writes, as I said in reference to the other flag event, my wife is an independently minded private citizen. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so. Oh, watch out. Exploding heads! Heads exploding! This from the guy who wrote the Dobbs decision, telling American women that they had no right to make their own decisions, not over some jointly held property, but their own bodies. And he, the author of Dobbs, has the gall or the absolute extraordinary unself-awareness to write. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so. Oh my God. As we say about every other minute in these times, you can't make it up. Unbelievable. And then he says that he will not recuse himself. He even cites the provision in the Code of Conduct that says a justice should disqualify himself in a proceeding in which the justice's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. That is, where an unbiased and reasonable person who is aware of all relevant circumstances would doubt that the justice could fairly discharge his duties. And then he again has the gall to say, the flag incidents do not satisfy that provision, and therefore I have no obligation to recuse myself. Oh my God. And then, so he claims powerlessness. He, who knew he was such a feminist? I'm just, I don't even, blah, 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 blah. And then he claims such unbelievable ignorance. He says, I was not aware. I did not see the upside down flag. And frankly, I did not know what that flag at the summer home was about. I saw it was some kind of had a tree on it, a pine tree. I was not aware, he writes, of any connection between that flag and the Stop the Steal movement. And neither was my wife. Oh, yeah, she just flew it because it was, she thought it was honoring pine trees. And when you think of the power this man wields and the power he refuses to yield in even one instance, a case in which a reasonable person could well assume that he is incapable of being impartial. God dang, whoa. And he was also powerless. Poor guy. Him and Clarence. They sound like they have, like they're poor, literally. He says his wife, owns half the house. And then he says, in our vacation home, well, I have no legal standing there at all. That was purchased with money my wife inherited and is titled in her name. I have nothing to do with it. God. God. I mean, uh, I think the folks at like Saturday Night Live, which I don't watch anymore and haven't for decades, but man, the folks at Saturday Night Live should give Alito like an award. just for making their lives so easy. They don't even, I mean, you don't even need writers anymore to do a show like that because it's writing itself in the real world. I mean, it's as if reality just seems like parody now, or like a sketch show. It can't be real. My favorite congressmen, or one of them, Jamie Raskin. He wrote a brilliant piece. I don't know where, in the New York Times, and it gets pretty legal. But he says, all right, so Alito won't recuse himself. Thomas and his insurrectionist wife won't recuse himself from these January 6 cases. Well, fine. Then there are other ways to remove them. And he teaches us, Raskin does, how. That in fact, the other justices of the court have the ability, and you could argue the responsibility, to remove these two from hearing these cases. And this sense you get that there is nothing to be done is simply wrong. I'll read just a little. Jamie Raskin. It seems unfathomable that the two justices could get away with deciding for themselves whether they can be impartial in ruling on these cases. And he goes into, explaining how both of them are just so tainted. And in fact, if we believe and blame the wife thing in terms of Alito, and that their wives have placed them then in a very uncomfortable position in which the appearance, which is enough, the appearance of impartiality is pretty damn strong. Raskin says everyone assumes that nothing can be done because, strangely, the highest court in the land has the lowest ethical standards, has no binding ethics code. Each justice gets to decide for him or herself whether or not he or she can be impartial. And as I mentioned before, Justice Alito is the most self-unaware person you can imagine. He has no... he's the last person, he and Thomas, the last people who should be judging whether or not they should sit in judgment. And then Raskin tells us this. The Department of Justice can petition the other 7 justices to require Alito and Thomas to recuse themselves. Not as a matter of doing the right thing, but as a matter of law. The Justice Department and Attorney General Garland can invoke 2 powerful textual authorities for this petition. One being the Constitution, specifically the Due Process Clause, and the other, the federal statute that mandates judicial disqualification for questionable impartiality. That is a specific section. Section 455. I won't go into how, but it flat out gives them, if Garland were to bring this petition, which he won't, it gives the Roberts and the other justices a way, however uncomfortable it might be, to tell these two they can't sit on these cases. If the arguments were made, Raskin says, properly before the court, Roberts and all the other justices would have both a constitutional obligation and a statutory obligation to enforce these standards of recusal. Indeed, he says, there is even a compelling argument that Chief Justice Roberts and the other justices could raise this matter of recusal on their own. They don't have to wait for Merrick Garland. Numerous circuit courts have agreed that this is the right course of action when members of an appellate court are aware of overt acts of a judge that reflect personal bias. I don't know. He goes on, there was one, he cites a case that actually comes out of Pennsylvania and its Supreme Court. This is a rather recent case. You might vaguely remember it. The Supreme Court, in a 5-3 decision in 2016, Williams v. Pennsylvania, this had to do with judicial bias. And the case concerned the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, who in the past had been a prosecutor, and had been a prosecutor in a death penalty case that now ended up before the state Supreme Court. Well, it seems like a no-brainer to me that the Chief Justice would say, hey guys, I was the prosecutor initially on this case, on this capital case. I'll have to recuse myself. And he didn't. He did not. Unbelievable. And it got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided otherwise. And in the decision written by Justice Kennedy, who unfortunately is no longer on the court, said that there is a maxim known in the law regarding due process that says no man can be a judge in his own case. So a judge or a justice can be convinced of his own impartiality, but also, as with Alito, completely missing what other people are clearly seeing. And this case with the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice here in Pennsylvania, when it got to the Supreme Court also endorsed the American Bar Association's Code of Judicial Conduct, which says that A judge shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And they even go into spouses. And if the spouse it could reasonably give the appearance of, it's so clear, it's all out here. And this SOB Alito has the gall to say that the flags in no way meet the standard for him to recuse himself. Fine, let him be that stupid. But the other justices do not have to follow suit. I don't know. He goes on to say that generally when these cases of recusal come before courts, the courts find that if there's any doubt about a judge's impartiality, it should be resolved in favor of recusal. If there's any doubt, tell the judge, sorry, not this case. You're out of here. You should read this yourself because I'll just read this one more thing. Raskin refers to John Roberts in his confirmation hearing, famously saying that a justice on the court is really like an umpire. Justices are like umpires. We just call balls and strikes. And Raskin says this. But professional baseball would never allow an umpire to continue to officiate the World Series, let's say, after learning that the pennant of one of the two teams competing was flying in the front yard of the umpire's home. And then, regarding Thomas's lovely spouse, Ginny, nor would an umpire be allowed to call balls and strikes in a World Series game after the umpire's wife tried to get the official score of a prior game in the series overthrown and canceled out to benefit the losing team. If judges are like umpires, then they should be treated like umpires and not team owners. This is quite a salvo that Raskin has thrown into the mix here. God bless him. He ends it by saying, this is not really optional for the justices. I look forward to seeing 7 members of the court act to defend the reputation and integrity of this institution. It's a good one. Laura writes, and Laura, I must tell you, worked with lawyers, a lot of smart lawyers, at the University of Michigan. She says, Lynn, if his wife can use the jointly held property as she sees fit, and he has no power over her, then he is saying she could run a brothel or a drug operation and he couldn't do anything about it. So strange for a judge. So strange for someone whose life has been the law. He sounds a bit senile. I don't know that it's senility. I think it's he's a zealot and he has power. and it has corrupted him, given that his job is to be impartial. He's incapable of impartiality. Okay, two of my favorite stories that came across my desk. I don't have a desk. I have a pockmarked dining room table. I sometimes wonder if people who like maybe come here and might eat here or just see it might think, why doesn't she do something about that table? I can't believe it's got marks on it, it's got gouges, stains, this and that. And I've wondered myself if I'm supposed to do something about this table. But you know what? I like this table. I like the fact that it looks used. It's been my table for decades and decades and decades, and I every stain and gouge is like an indicator of my life. It's life in my life. And I do wonder though, I wonder if people sort of might say as they, are away from my earshot, I just don't understand why she doesn't do something about that table. Okay. Now, my favorite stories. The term offensive can obviously mean, a few things, right? Um, Going on the offensive is something that, weapons are offensive or defensive. Football is offensive and defense. That's a word that gets used a lot in a lot of different contexts and different meanings. And so I sort of got a kick out of this one because it incorporates two different meanings, this story. And it is that North Korea, in its quarrel with South Korea, went on the offensive in the last week. You might not have heard about it. And the way it went on the offensive is particularly offensive because what North Korea did was send hundreds of balloons over the border. The South Koreans are aware of 260 such. These are big balloons, that are carrying packages. And these 260 balloons were sent by North Korea into South Korea, and they were outfitted, as weapons often are, with a timer device so that after it was clearly where it wanted to, release its payload, because each balloon had a payload, it did so. And the payload turned out to be garbage. North Korea actually sent bags of garbage into the skies to be dropped on South Koreans. I mean, wow. Cigarette butts, plastic water bottles, used paper, shoes, you name it. If it was garbage, it was weaponized. Weaponized garbage. I love it. So there you have it. The offensive, right? Yeah. So that was a good one. And then this, again, in the you can't make it up category, there's a museum in Seattle called the Wing Luke Museum. Strange name. And it spent some time organizing an exhibit. The exhibit was called Confronting Hate Together. And the story is that half of the museum staff have walked out to protest the exhibit of Confronting Hate Together. You can't make it up. And it will not come as a surprise to you that the inability of the museum staff to see the irony in their walking out of this particular exhibit that they, in fact, had labored on, which was intended to bring the community together, was, of course, over what they perceived as not sufficiently pro-Palestinian or something. Incredible. Incredible. There was something that said about anti-Zionism, and this made them all their heads explode, and they could not in any way now confront hate together because there were some words that triggered them. You can't make it up. Saying, God, guys, the power of nature. There's a one page in the here. I got it. Here, you hear it? Here's a page from today's New York Times, and man, like the top third is a picture of the lava exploding in Iceland in this massive eruption, one of many that have occurred. It is so glorious. It's so unbelievable, just shooting fire. It looks like fire, but it's more substantial. And muck with nature does what nature does. We puny humans do what we do, but nature has the last say. And under this thing about the whole thing about the volcano was a story about how, yeah, it's the hottest year. It's so hot that in New Delhi they broke every record ever known. In New Delhi, where you wouldn't want to be right now, it was 126 degrees yesterday. That's not heat index. That's the actual temperature. 126. And the volcano, by the way, one of Iceland's biggest tourist attractions, which is a spa, a geothermal spa, makes sense. A geothermal spa, which is located in the mountain range where this occurred. The weather department, the meteorology department in Iceland deals with stuff different than most weather people have to deal with. So that they were actually able to forecast, they doing whatever readings they do of what the temperature is of the volcano at any given time, they were able to give people in the vicinity a 2-hour warning. Hey, this thing's about to blow. Get the hell out. So they sort of like we would do with a tornado warning or something. They put out, these evacuation orders. Evacuate, evacuate, it says. And they do, and they're able to. There's an entire spa, the geothermal spa called the Blue Lagoon, and that place was filled with guests. And yeah, it ain't anymore. But everybody got out, and nobody was harmed. But that thing just blew open a whole ridge of a mountain. Uh, wow, incredible. So, what else I got here? Hang on. Oh dear, there was this really upsetting story. I mean, there's been so many stories about how disinformation is going to become more and more and more so, and with AI, give it up. Good God, you and I won't know if we're reading something that's true or just a really good fake, and it sure as hell looks like the real deal. It is about to become a tsunami of disinformation and leading into the election. It is expected that the Russians and the Chinese and others with ill intent will be ratcheting up the disinformation that they put into our media ecosystem. And there will be many people on our side, and even what are considered, I guess, reliable sources by some, that will fall for some of this, that will further promote it. So it's just, it's going, talk about raining garbage. Yeah. So it's very much like that. These are like North Korean balloons carrying garbage that will be dispensed over our air. And we will be, I don't know, there's no real way to stop it, especially with that damn pesky thing we have called the First Amendment. But there's a guy who I had never heard of, and it's a front page story in the Times today, which I do recommend to you if you just want to freak. There's a guy. His name is Dugan. He's 51 years old, and he started life out as an American law enforcement person. Well, he didn't start, but when he became a working adult, he was a deputy sheriff in Palm Beach County, Florida. A deputy sheriff. That is not what he is today. He is today a Russian citizen. He sought and got asylum in Russia, running from 21 felony charges of extortion and wiretapping and other stuff. He took off, and the Russians embraced him. He's been in Russia since 2016, and he, by himself, is responsible for an extraordinary percentage of the disinformation aimed at us coming out of Russia. They got a former deputy, a former deputy sheriff is sitting in his apartment in Moscow. And he has created so many false news sites that they pop up in 2 days recently. He threw another 103 new sites into our social media, and he's good at it. So he makes these things look like legitimate digital newspapers. And they're coming out of like the Miami Chronicle and the Chicago Chronicle and the DC Weekly and the San Francisco Chronicle and the London Crier. And he puts this stuff out and it's filled with disinformation. A lot of it's about the war in Ukraine, but increasingly it will also be anti-Biden. I mean, efforts to rein this stuff in, I don't think they. Speaking of offense and defense, I don't think we got defense for this kind of thing. We don't. Everybody, and again, because of First Amendment, and again, because of the inability of a lot of these sites or the unwillingness to monitor what is on their sites. He's a piece of work, this guy. Last year, he impersonated an FBI agent. He called a guy I know, Steve Brill. Steve Brill has been on to him, and he knows it. And Brill is nobody you want to screw with because he's brilliant. I knew him because he was a friend of my brother's at Yale. And Stephen Brill went on to be, he founded Court TV, and he now runs something that I forget what it's called, but it is an effort to fight back this disinformation. I forget what Brill calls it, but God bless him for doing it. And he's been on to this guy. He's aware of how much this guy is polluting our political process and our media. I don't know. What are we gonna do? It says here that a lot of his stuff appears in on X, Twitter. By the way, have you seen that everybody's most unfavorite billionaire, Elon Musk, is now flat out all in Trump? And that is reflected on his site, Twitter, as well. Frightening. Again, an extraordinary source of disinformation. They just make stuff up out of whole cloth. And as we have learned, there are always people on the other end, disingenuous or not, who are quite willing to gobble up any material. I saw somewhere where somebody said, it might have been I think an editorial, and I didn't bother reading it because it made me, so often now, just the headline is all you can take, right? And I think, all right, that's good. I don't need to make myself any more miserable with more facts here. But it was about the fact that for Biden supporters to try to change people's minds about the economy. There's this extraordinary sense that it's just flat out wrong about the economy that people hold, dear. And hang on, I'm gonna. I forgot what I was looking for. Oh yeah. Here it is. So this was in the Washington Post and by Catherine Rampell, and she points out the reality of the economy, but the fact that you can throw these facts that I'm about to share with you at the majority of Americans who think our economy is crap until you're blue in the face. And the fact, this is our fact-free era we're living in. Facts have no weight. And for people for whom facts have always been, this is what we fight with. We fight with facts. Well, have you noticed they've lost some power? You can just make up your own. And sometimes those made up ones are the kind of facts that people will more readily believe. So she sort of just put it all together and she said nearly everything Americans believe about the economy is wrong. And she's basing it on a poll. The majority of Americans think the economy is shrinking. It's quite the opposite. About as many say we're in a recession. We are not. The economy has been growing like gangbusters for nearly 2 years. Even throw inflation into that mix. All the benchmarks that are used to determine whether an economy is strong or weak, they're all exceeding expectations. From the United States economy has been outperforming almost all other economies. Half of Americans believe the unemployment rate is at a 50-year high. Now, what are we going to do? How do we have a country in which people that are just wrong get to vote? I mean, they're living in some 49% of Americans believe the unemployment rate is at a 50-year high. In fact, we've been in the longest stretch of low unemployment since Tricky Dicky was president. She says, why would the public appear so wrong? I mean, their perceptions be so wrong. And I'll tell you, well, it'd be the news, right? Where do people learn about the economy? Well, they might also their own experience, like, people pay attention to the price of gas or the price of this. And in fact, some things that are very important to people are seemingly going up. Insurance, home prices. But yesterday I told you about bad news bias. This is where it was this piece that I pulled that out of. That she says media know that people are going to pay attention to stories that scare them or enrage them. And so news almost always puts negative spins on even positive information. And then you got the social media and the disinformation folks, and put that together with the human bias for negative news. Uh, and you can see that, I I don't know. It's not a comforting piece. I mean, when you're told that facts, so what are you going to use to attract people to your candidate? And if if what you have in your quiver is fact, it's pretty disquieting to realize that that's just not good. It's not enough. It doesn't work in this era. And what does work? Performance, entertainment, loudest voice gets heard, most outrageous things get front and center, and it's how you end up with an empty suit and an empty soul like Donald Trump as president of the United States and potentially president of the United States again. Just unbelievable. Oh, Coco writes the Supreme Court has lost its luster and credibility. Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's quantifiable. When I think it's ranking almost lower than no, I don't think anything's lower than Congress in terms of America's estimation. But yeah, and when you have a country in which nobody trusts or reveres, let alone trusts, um, these foundational institutions, then you're heading into serious trouble, like autocracy, because that's how autocrats get where they get. You diminish the power of those foundational institutions. And that's what the Republicans have been hard at work doing for decades now, well before Donald Trump. It was Reagan, right, who said the scariest words are you ever want to hear are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. So, this whole idea of government being a source of negative stuff, nothing positive about it, and not to be trusted and needs to be shrunken so it can be drowned in a bathtub of disinformation. Another one of you is saying, good God, Alito has just, given Congress more reason why you either have to put more justices on the court or do term limits. I don't think that it won't pass because we're such a divided country, and you got so many nitwits voting who don't know up from down that we're never going to have enough people who agree with that assessment uh, in the capacity to get it done. We have a dysfunctional government right now. The only part of the government that is working is the executive branch. But of course, if the genius American voters put Donald Trump back into that, we will lose that branch as well. Scary stuff. And on that depressing note, on this beautiful day, I'm looking at that sun. Oh, yeah. I'm going to have to leave you. I am. And I hope you have a good few days before I see you next. And maybe when we next meet up, we'll know whether Donald Trump is a felon. I mean, we know he's a felon, but we'll know whether the jury has determined that. Keep, for those of you who do it, pray. That's all I can say. Pray. And have a good one.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.